the most powerful man in the world, conqueror of nations, destroyer of Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar ruled an empire that made the world tremble, but in a single moment, everything changed. His mind shattered, his dignity vanished. He crawled like a wild animal eating grass like cattle. Why did God turn the most powerful king on earth into a beast? Was it just punishment? Or is there a much deeper message hidden in this story? Get ready, because this reflection is for those who want to grow in faith, understanding, and spiritual life. Hit the like button and subscribe, because what you're about to discover might just change everything you believe about success and humility. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just any king. He was the emperor of the most powerful empire of his time, Babylon. His military victories were legendary, his hanging gardens were considered one of the wonders of the ancient world, and his capital was the center of global power. When he marched with his armies, entire nations trembled. Jerusalem, the holy city, fell before his might, and Solomon's temple was reduced to rubble by his command. He wasn't just a conqueror, he was an empire builder, a visionary who turned Babylon into the most magnificent metropolis on earth. But something dangerous started growing in the heart of this powerful man: pride. With every victory, every conquest, every architectural marvel he built, Nebuchadnezzar began to believe that all this greatness was solely the result of his own genius and strength. The military success, the economic prosperity, the admiration of the people, all of it fed an ego that grew like a cancer in his soul. He started to see himself not just as a king, but as someone almost divine, worthy of all glory and honor. What's even more intriguing is that Nebuchadnezzar had already had supernatural encounters with the God of Israel through the prophet Daniel. He had witnessed extraordinary miracles, interpretations of dreams that no one else could figure out, and clear demonstrations of divine power. Daniel had interpreted his most complex dreams. His 3 Hebrew friends had come out of the blazing furnace unharmed, and the king himself had publicly acknowledged the supremacy of Israel's God. These weren't minor events, they were divine, interventions that should have left a deep mark on his conscience and shaped his perspective about the true source of power. But human memory is fragile when pride takes over. As time went by, Nebuchadnezzar started downplaying those supernatural experiences, chalking them up to coincidence or his own wisdom in picking good advisors. That's the devastating thing about pride. It rewrites our history, twists our view of reality, and makes us forget how much we depend on forces greater than ourselves. But what Nebuchadnezzar didn't know was that God was watching every arrogant thought, every proud word, every act of self-sufficiency. And a terrible lesson was being prepared, a lesson that would echo through the ages as a solemn warning about the dangers of unchecked pride. But you might be wondering, how exactly was God planning to teach this lesson to the most powerful man on earth? One night, while Nebuchadnezzar slept in his luxurious palace, surrounded by all the opulence that power can buy, something extraordinary happened. God sent him a dream so vivid, so disturbing, that the king woke up with his heart racing and his mind restless. In the dream, he saw a majestic tree, so tall it touched the sky, so wide its shade covered the whole earth. This tree was magnificent. Its fruit fed every living thing, its leaves gave shelter to the birds of the sky, and the animals of the field rested in its shadow. It was a vision of absolute prosperity, power, and influence. But then, something terrifying happened in the dream. A heavenly being, a holy watcher, came down from heaven with a devastating order: cut down the tree, chop off its branches, strip its leaves, scatter its fruit, let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. The majestic tree was destroyed, but something even more disturbing was commanded. The stump and roots had to stay in the ground, bound with iron and bronze chains. And then came the most mysterious part of the dream. The tree would be given the mind of an animal and would live like the wild beasts for 7 periods of time. Nebuchadnezzar woke up deeply troubled. He knew this wasn't just any dream. There was something prophetic, something divine about it. Like he'd done before, he called in all his wise men, magicians, enchanters, and astrologers, but none of them could interpret the dream. It was like God had blocked their understanding, saving the interpretation for his chosen servant. Finally, Daniel was brought before the king, and when the king told him the dream, the prophet was stunned for almost an hour, clearly shaken by what God had revealed. Daniel's interpretation was straightforward and terrifying. The majestic tree represented Nebuchadnezzar himself and his kingdom. His greatness, his global influence, his absolute power, all of it would be stripped away. Even more shocking, the king would lose his sanity and live like a wild animal for 7 years, until he recognized that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whomever he wants. With tears in his eyes, Daniel pleaded with the king, "So, O king, please accept my advice. Break off your sins by doing what's right and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Maybe then your prosperity will continue." But would the most powerful man in the world listen to this divine warning, or would his pride blind him to the disaster that was coming? A whole year went by after the prophetic dream. 12 months of wasted opportunities, ignored divine warnings, and rejected wise advice. Nebuchadnezzar chose the most dangerous path possible. He simply ignored God's warning. Maybe he thought his position made him untouchable, or that his power was just too great to be shaken by anything, even by God himself. Pride had built a bubble of illusion around him, a fake sense of invincibility that blinded him to the spiritual reality all around. One particular afternoon, Nebuchadnezzar was strolling across the terraces of his royal palace in Babylon. The view was breathtaking. He could see all the magnificence of his capital, with its hanging gardens, massive walls, majestic temples, and bustling streets. Pride filled his chest like a sweet poison, and he just couldn't resist the urge to brag. In a loud, arrogant voice, he declared, "Isn't this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence, by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Every word out of his mouth was like a direct challenge to the God who created everything. The words were still on his lips when something supernatural happened. A voice from heaven echoed with absolute authority. "This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox, and 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes." There was no negotiation, no grace period, no second chance. The judgment was instant and irreversible. Right then and there, something terrible happened to Nebuchadnezzar's mind. His sanity shattered like glass, his human awareness broke apart, and he was overtaken by a condition modern scholars call clinical lycanthropy, a rare form of madness where a person believes they're an animal. The most powerful man in the world started acting like a wild beast. He was driven away from people, ate grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven. His hair grew out like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. The transformation was total and humiliating. But why did God choose such a drastic and seemingly cruel punishment? What was the divine purpose behind this extreme humiliation? Nebuchadnezzar's transformation into a wild creature wasn't an act of divine cruelty, but a precise spiritual surgery designed to cut out the malignant tumor of pride that had infected his soul. God, in his infinite wisdom, knew that only an extreme lesson could break through the armor of arrogance the king had built around his heart. Sometimes when pride gets so deeply rooted, so dominant, only complete humiliation can break its chains and set the soul free for the truth. This wasn't punishment for punishment's sake. It was bitter medicine for a deadly spiritual disease. The main purpose of this humiliation was to teach Nebuchadnezzar a fundamental truth he had forgotten. All power, all authority, all greatness comes from God. The king had started to believe that his military genius, his architectural vision, his political skills, and his personal strength were the only sources of his success. He had become an idolater of himself, worshipping his own image and giving divine credit to human achievements. God needed to shatter this dangerous illusion, not just to save Nebuchadnezzar, but to send a clear message to all rulers and leaders of every age. No throne stands apart from the heavenly throne, and this lesson reached way beyond just the king. Babylon was the center of the known world, and whatever happened to its emperor echoed through all nations. When people saw the most powerful man on earth reduced to an animal state, they learned a deep truth about human power. It's temporary, fragile, and totally dependent on God's permission. This public demonstration of God's sovereignty served as a solemn warning to every proud leader, every arrogant ruler, everyone who forgets they're just temporary stewards of gifts that don't actually belong to them. The specific choice to turn Nebuchadnezzar into a wild creature also carried deep symbolism. Pride, when left unchecked, drags a person down to a level even lower than animals. Animals act on instinct, but humans were created to live in conscious relationship with God. When we reject that relationship and put ourselves in God's place, we lose our true humanity. Nebuchadnezzar needed to literally experience this degradation to understand what had happened to his soul spiritually. But was this story of humiliation going to have an ending? Was there any hope of restoration for a man who had fallen so far? 7 long years went by. 7 years of total humiliation, living like an animal, dignity in shreds. During all that time, Nebuchadnezzar lived like a wild beast, his mind shattered, his consciousness lost in a maze of madness. But God, in his infinite mercy, had set a limit to this discipline. It wouldn't last forever. It would last only until that proud heart was completely broken and the humbled soul was ready to recognize the truth. And then, in a divine moment, like sunrise after the longest night, something miraculous happened. Nebuchadnezzar's sanity was restored. The first sign of restoration was the return of his spiritual awareness. Nebuchadnezzar lifted his eyes to heaven, a powerful symbolic gesture that showed he finally recognized there's an authority higher than any human. In that moment, he didn't look at his palaces, didn't admire his achievements, didn't brag about his victories. He looked up to the source of all authority, to the throne above every throne. It was a moment of total surrender, complete brokenness, genuine humility born from suffering and deep reflection on the true nature of power. And then, from the depths of his restored soul, came a praise that echoed through the heavens. Blessed the Most High, I praised and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the people of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" This wasn't forced or political praise. It was the genuine recognition of a man who had experienced both power and powerlessness, both glory and humiliation. The restoration was instant and complete. His sanity returned, his majesty was restored, his advisors sought him out again, and he was put back on his throne with even greater honor. But now there was a fundamental difference. Nebuchadnezzar wasn't the same man anymore. Pride had been replaced by humility, arrogance by reverence, self-sufficiency by conscious dependence on God. He had learned the most important lesson any leader can learn. All power is delegated, all authority is borrowed, and all true greatness comes from recognizing our dependence on the Creator. But what's the central message this extraordinary story wants to teach us? How can we apply this lesson to our own lives? Nebuchadnezzar's experience wasn't recorded in Scripture just as a historical curiosity or an interesting moral tale. It's a vivid, undeniable demonstration of a fundamental truth that governs the whole universe. God has absolute sovereignty over every kingdom, every nation, every leader, and every human authority. It doesn't matter how powerful a ruler is, how vast their influence, or how solid their control seems. Everything is under the supreme authority of the Creator. This truth isn't just theological, it's practical, current, and extremely relevant for our times. When we look at world history, we see this principle playing out over and over again. Empires that seemed eternal collapsed overnight. Leaders who thought they were invincible were humbled. Nations that prided themselves on their self-sufficiency discovered their own fragility. History is full of Nebuchadnezzars, men and women who reached the peak of human power, only to find out there's a much higher authority ruling over everything. This isn't just a matter of religious opinion, It's a pattern that repeats itself throughout the centuries. God's sovereignty over human rulers also means he can use any leader at any time to accomplish his eternal purposes. He can lift up the humble and bring down the proud. He can use just leaders to bless nations and allow corrupt ones to serve as instruments of discipline. He can raise up rulers from the most unexpected places and remove from power those who seem untouchable. This truth should bring both comfort and sobriety. Comfort because no matter what political chaos we might see, there is a sovereign God guiding the course of history. Sobriety because all of us, in our own spheres of influence, are accountable to this supreme authority. For us, living in an age of democracy and individual rights, this lesson is especially relevant. It's easy to develop a self-sufficient mindset, believing our professional success, financial stability, social influence, or leadership positions are solely the result of our own merit. But Nebuchadnezzar's story reminds us that everything we have, our intelligence, our opportunities, our health, our skills, are gifts from God that can be taken away in an instant if we become too proud to recognize their source. But there's an even subtler, more universal danger that this story exposes. A danger that threatens every one of us, no matter our social status or political power. Do you know what it is? The pride that brought Nebuchadnezzar down isn't just a problem for kings and rulers. It's a universal tendency of the human heart that can hit anyone, no matter their social status. The Bible consistently points out pride as one of the most dangerous and destructive sins, saying, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Proverbs 16:18. Nebuchadnezzar's story is just one of many biblical examples that show this timeless truth. Think about other cases: the Tower of Babel, Lucifer's fall, King Herod being eaten by worms after accepting worship from people. Can you spot a consistent pattern in how God deals with human pride? What makes pride so dangerous is how it blinds us to our real condition. Nebuchadnezzar was so drunk on his own greatness that he couldn't see how much he depended on God. Pride acts like a warped lens. It blows up our achievements, shrinks our flaws, and most importantly, hides our need for God. It's like a spiritual poison. The more you take in, the less you notice how much it's messing you up. Have you ever noticed how pride can mess with your perspective, making you think you're more capable, more righteous, or more important than you really are? What makes Nebuchadnezzar's lesson so powerful is that it shows no amount of success, power, or wealth can shield you from the consequences of pride. If the most powerful man in the ancient world could be brought down to the level of an animal because of his pride, what makes us think we're immune? In our modern culture that celebrates pride as something positive and encourages self-glorification on social media, Nebuchadnezzar's story is a much-needed wake-up call. Pride puts us in direct opposition to God, because as James 4:6 reminds us, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. But there's hope in this seemingly dark story, because it also shows us how to avoid Nebuchadnezzar's fate. Voluntary humility is always better than forced humiliation. When we recognize our dependence on God, when we credit our successes to His grace, when we see ourselves as stewards, not owners, of our talents and resources, we protect ourselves from pride's poison. How do you handle your successes? Do you see them as your own doing or as blessings that call for gratitude? The answer to that question could decide whether you follow Nebuchadnezzar's early path or choose the wiser road that recognizes the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 9:10. Paradoxically, Nebuchadnezzar's story reveals one of the deepest spiritual truths. Real greatness is found in humility. Before his transformation, the Babylonian king had all the outward greatness, amazing palaces, unbeatable armies, insane wealth, but he lacked the real inner greatness that comes from knowing your true place in God's universe. Only after walking through the valley of humiliation did he discover a more genuine and lasting greatness, based not on what he owned or controlled, but on who he recognized as truly great, the Most High God, who does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. This principle of greatness through humility runs all through Scripture and finds its fullest expression in Jesus Christ. He, being in very nature God, chose to empty himself, taking the form of a servant and humbling himself to death, even death on a cross. Philippians 2:6-8. And because of this voluntary humility, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name above every name. 4:9. The contrast with Nebuchadnezzar is striking. While the Babylonian king had to be humbled by a harsh judgment, Christ freely chose the path of humility out of love for us. Which example are you following in your own life? The humility Nebuchadnezzar finally learned didn't diminish him. On the contrary, the Bible says that after his restoration, even greater majesty was added to me. Daniel 4:36. This shows another deep spiritual principle. Humility doesn't shrink us. It puts us in the right position to receive more from God. As Jesus taught, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Matthew 23-12. Humility opens us up to receive grace, wisdom, and blessings that pride keeps out. Have you ever noticed how owning your limitations and dependence on God actually set you free to grow and thrive in ways pride never could? The final lesson from Nebuchadnezzar's story is that we all face a choice. We can humble ourselves before God now, or we can keep clinging to our pride until painful circumstances force us to see the truth. Voluntary humility is always the wiser, less painful path. As C.S. Lewis wisely said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. When we focus less on our own importance and more on God's greatness and the needs of others, we find a freedom and peace that pride can never give. May we learn from Nebuchadnezzar before we need our own season of eating grass like oxen to realize that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men. Nebuchadnezzar's transformation from a proud king to a wild animal and then into a humble and wise man is more than just a historical account. It's a mirror reflecting our own spiritual condition and a roadmap guiding us toward true greatness. Now, I want to ask you, the one watching, in what area of your life might pride be sneaking in quietly? Maybe it's at work, in your relationships, your achievements, or even your spiritual life. Nebuchadnezzar's story teaches us that none of us are immune to this universal danger. Drop your answer in the comments. What part of this story touched your heart the most? Was it the king's humiliation, his restoration, or maybe the lesson about God's sovereignty? Your thoughts might inspire someone else watching. This story about Nebuchadnezzar isn't just something from the past, it's a mirror for our own spiritual journey. Each of us carries within the potential for both destructive pride and life-changing humility. The path we choose between these two shapes not only our eternal destiny, but also the quality of our life right here and now. If this message spoke to you, if you realized you need to take a closer look at the areas where pride might be sneaking in, then hit that like button as a sign that you're serious about spiritual growth and chasing after real humility. I want to invite you to do something special. Write in the comments, "Pride pushes me away, humility brings me closer to God." This isn't just a statement, it's a confession of faith, a personal commitment to change. When you type those words, you're making a conscious choice to reject the path that led Nebuchadnezzar to humiliation and embrace the one that brought him restoration. Your comment could inspire others who are struggling with the same issues, building a community of people committed to genuine humility. If you want to keep going on this journey of life-changing Bible discoveries, subscribe to the Biblical Memories channel and turn on notifications. Here you'll find stories that don't just teach, but challenge, inspire, and transform. Every video is carefully crafted to reveal deep truths that can totally change how you see God, yourself, and your purpose in life. Don't miss out on being part of this community of people seeking spiritual growth through the most powerful stories in the Bible. And since we're talking about powerful leaders who face the consequences of their choices, you can't miss our next video, The End of King Solomon, How the King Faced His Greatest Regret. If Nebuchadnezzar's story got to you, get ready to see how the wisest man who ever lived faced his own downfall and the regret that marked his final days. It's a story of wisdom, power, downfall, and redemption that perfectly ties in with the lesson we just learned. Click the card on the screen or check the link in the description. Your journey of spiritual transformation is just getting started.